It's always a privilege of studying the Word of God. Sometimes, though, it brings on us some things that we may not to spend too much time on, because a lot of people think it's a sensitive area. But of all the things that we need to discuss at times, it is the high cost of not giving. Inflation is a word that all of us know about. It's a word on the mind of most. Everything is up. Food prices are up. Gas prices are down and then they go up. Medical cost is just unbelievably high. Housing, if you go to rent a house now or go buy one, you'll find out that the price has gone up quite a bit. It seems that everything that we have around us has gone up. And the only alternative for not spending more and paying more is, unfortunately, death. And then you get the funeral expenses. They've skyrocketed during the last decade. It used to be that you could bury somebody for $300. Now you can't even cremate them for that much, which is an animalistic form of the disposition of the body. When everything goes up but the cost that a lot of people think that they are involved in giving to the Lord. They can hold out on Him. He's not going to be here to check on them. They can get away with it because, after all, He and they are the only one that knows how much they give. The only thing that's steady in the budget is the amount that's given. I talked to a man one time, and he said he'd put $5 in the offering for the last 20 years. Do you realize the difference in the cost of things? Have inflation not been involved in the last 20 years? We can get along without some things, but there's no country that suffers the effects of inflation like the kingdom of heaven. In the early church, many were in the position to give, and some did and some not. If you have your Bibles, turn with me to the book of Acts, the 5th chapter. And I know that many of you know the story of Ananias and Sapphira. It is told us by the brethren of that time that Ananias was the leader in the discrepancy of giving, and as Sapphira, his wife, was really not involved in it. Ananias had to talk her into doing what she did. But the problem is, both of them paid the penalty. There was a certain man named Ananias with Sapphira, his wife, and they sold a possession and kept back part of the price, his wife also being privy to it, and brought a certain part and laid it at the apostles' feet. And Peter said, Ananias, why hath Satan filled thine heart to lie to the Holy Ghost, and to keep back part of the price of the land? While it remained, was it not thine own? After it sold, was it not in thine own power? Why hast thou conceived this thing in thine heart? Thou hast not lied unto men, you've lied unto God. And Ananias, hearing these words, fell down and gave up the ghost. Great fear came upon all them that heard these things. And the young man arose, wound him up, and carried him out and buried him. And it was about the space of 3 hours after, when his wife, not knowing what was done, came in. And Peter answered unto her, Tell me whether ye sold the land for so much. And she said, Yea, for so much. Then Peter said unto her, How is it that you have agreed together to tempt the Spirit of the Lord? Behold, the feet of them that have buried thy husband are at the door, and shall carry thee out. Then fell she down straightway at his feet, and yielded up the ghost. And the young men came in, and found her dead, and carrying her forth, buried her by her husband. And great fear came upon all the church and upon as many as heard these things. It doesn't matter how many stories the Lord would give us, how many examples. Reason and rationality would tell us when everything goes up, the cost of giving cannot stay level. The thing that causes us problems is that we've not considered that we can't get along without giving. How much did Ananias and Sapphira steal? Was it $1,000 an acre? Or was it $1? We don't know. What we do know is the cost. The temple treasury is an unusual place for the Lord to sit. But he sat there one day and observed people giving. Turn with me to the book of Mark, the 12th chapter. And let's read verse 41 and 42. You know this story too. The sad part is that most of us know these stories, but we act as though they are affecting only other people, not ourselves. In Mark 12, 41 and 42, and Jesus sat over against the treasury, and beheld how the people cast money into the treasury. And many that were rich cast in much. And there came a certain poor widow, and she threw in 2 mites, which make a farthing. And he called unto him his disciples, and saith unto them, Verily I say unto you, that this poor widow hath cast more in than all they which hath cast into the treasury. For they all had cast in their abundance, but she of her want did cast in all that she had, even all of her living. You said the old gal was insane. Jesus said unmoved, as the wealthy gave millions. Yet he called his disciples and made a big to-do over a woman who had cast in a penny in the coffers. Had Ananias and Sapphira pocketed $1 million, would it have been enough to pay for their souls? Holding back the cost was their business. But when they let on like that they were doing what God had commanded, because they were emulating Barnabas. But when they were holding back, it cost them everything. In the book of Matthew, while you're over there around Mark, turn back to the 16th chapter. And in Matthew, the 16th chapter, in verse 26, Jesus put it this way, For what is a man profited, if he shall gain the whole world and lose his own soul? Or what shall a man give in exchange for his soul? No doubt every giver could spend on himself what he gives to the Lord. But after you consider the cost, you consider those costs that will be indebtedly given to you and I, unless we don't consider how much we give. You see, the Lord has not tried to take from us what's ours. In fact, to be honest with you, of all the governments that exist or have existed over the annals of time, the government of Jesus Christ has been the least involved in bringing money in from the people that were members of that government. But there is a cost to all things. And the reason for the cost is not that the Lord is poor, or is not that he is in need, but the Lord has made us stewards, or managers, of what he has given us. Some have mocked the Lord by acting as though they don't have to have any requiredness to the monies that the Lord has given them. They've mocked, and they've decided that they can do as they desire. And what they do is expose their heart. The poor brethren in Macedonia that Paul would write about and brags much about had begged Paul for an opportunity to give. It was more than they could afford, but they still begged him to take it. The problem is that if we don't have the right attitude of heart, even if we give a little bit, it will cost us too much. No one can follow Christ because he is the giver that gave more than all. But if you follow him, you have to be as he commanded. Deny yourself. Now, there's some things that we're just going to have to deny. The providence of God is that which God the Father has given to all of us who are his children. And we can't love like we are followers of God and give like infidels. You ever noticed? In all the religious annals of time, how many hospitals you see that come from religious groups? Have you ever seen a Hindu hospital? Have you ever seen the Buddhist Recovery Center? Have you ever seen the Islamic Relief for Cancer Center? Have you ever seen anyone in any religion ever be those who give to the God that they claim they love other than we who are Christians? It's an astounding thing that the United States of America is always petitioned and answers the petition to give when there are great needs arise. And the amount of money that we give is phenomenal, even to the extent that sometimes when we send food and stuff to these people who are starving to death, the Russians stand out there and steal the cargo and stamp it with their name on it and give it in their name, acting as though it comes from them. There was a town in Missouri that decided they were going to completely get rid of God. And one of the things they had to close when they were getting rid of God was the hospital, because who was going to pay for it? The infidels don't owe anybody anything. Therefore, they weren't going to make up any monies to help the poor and the needy. They were not ever in consideration when it came to trying to help somebody who couldn't help themselves. Now, God the Father is not the father of infidels. He's not the father also of those who have denied the faith. In 1 Timothy, the 5th chapter and the 8th verse, if a man provide not for his own, and especially they of his own household, he's worse than an infidel and denied the faith. God has given us an opportunity whereby we can respond. We can not just put our mouth in gear, we can actually do something else. As stewards of God, we don't expect God to provide the goods which we can labor. And if we're not properly using the things that God has given us, how can we expect him to bless us? We have need. If he is, take them from us and give them to somebody who has need. Because the Lord is a purveyor of the thoughts and the intents of the hearts of the worshiper of Jesus Christ. And he intends us to make proper use of the benefits that he's given us. Money and it's not going to do you that much good. If you do, overlook some commands that you are favored to respond to. Give, and you shall receive. Or in another, give, and it shall be given unto you. If a miser was all the money that he had, and had no money to be able to afford anything, food or clothing, if he had given to the community when he had money, would it not have been that the community might intend or consider to give to him when he had need? Or would the miser expect the retribution that he had distributed the whole time that he had lived there? The only way that we can ever have real security, and a lot of people don't believe this, is we have to have more faith in God than we do in the bank. If we don't do that, we're going to be like the rich young farmer who Jesus gave a favorite name. He called him Fool. You remember about the old rich farmer in Luke the 12th chapter? In Luke the 12th chapter, if you'll study the Old Testament covenant, when a man filled up his barn, according to the law of Moses, under which this farmer lived, he wasn't supposed to build another farm or another barn. Do you know that he was going against the law of God when he built another barn? No, a lot of people don't even know that. They don't even have any idea what the law of Moses taught concerning giving. They think the law of Moses is a decadent law that only concerns the tenth, or what we call the tithe. But if you'll look under the laws of the year of Jubilee, as was taught in the Levitical priesthood, you'll find out that the law of Moses taught when your barn got bigger, you don't build you don't build a bigger barn. No. You know what you're supposed to do? Give away the excess. If you had your barn full, you got enough sense to know that God had taken care of you. And there were people around that needed help. And instead of building a bigger barn, what in the world was it that you were doing when you were building a barn that would hold more goods than the big barn that you had before? But showing that you didn't appreciate what God had given. There's an old boy in East Tennessee that kept telling the preacher, "Preacher, when my money gets straightened out, I'm going to put some money in the offering." And then he came over and he said, "You know, preacher, one of the things I'm going to do is if when I sell my calves at the market, I'll put some money in the offering." He was on the way to the church services one Sunday night, and the windows were open. And he heard the brethren singing a song that he could hear as he was coming over the hills. I don't know if you've ever or sung the song that says, "The half has not been told." Well, that's a favorite song of a lot of congregations, and I think we've sung it here even. But as this old boy was coming over the hills, instead of them hearing them sing, "The half has not yet been told," he thought they were singing, "The calf has not yet been sold." And he thought they were making fun of him and mocking him. That's the reason that a lot of people are sensitive when it comes to their giving. They don't think the preacher has any right to say anything about it. You visit the brothers, and they have a beautiful home. They have more food than they know what to do with. They have jobs that they have so that they can feed their family. And you ask them to help a poor brother or sister in need, sometimes they kind of get their back up a little bit. One of them told me one time, "I've lived through one depression, and I'm not going to be caught again. So I'm not going to put any money toward helping. He died 2 years later. He never saw that depression come. But what happened to the money that he had put away instead of helping the poor? We used to have, back in the hills, if somebody's house burnt down, somebody's barn burnt down, or if they had a flood on their crops, the brethren would all get together and bring in food. And so one day that happened, and as the brethren were bringing in their bags of groceries, one of the men that was most profitable in that area was out and couldn't get there, so he sent his son. And before he got there, the brethren were talking about old brother so-and-so, and he had all the money, and he had all the provisions, and he hadn't sent a dime. And about that time, his son pulled up with his horse and his wagon full of all the groceries and the food that would feed a family for 2 months. And when he pulled up there, he said, Dad said to tell you he was sorry he couldn't get here, but he sent a little bit like this in the back of the wagon, and we can give to these people, and they'll be able to eat for a while. Now, the people that had done all the complaining had brought a bag of groceries. This brother sent a wagon full. It's not that God wants our money. It's just that you can't serve two masters. What you pay for an earthly abode determines a lot of times where you live. And, of course, also, how long you're going to live there. Because if you don't pay the rent, then they're going to kick you out. Why you part with God of your income to pay Him for the blessings that He has given you, you don't ever consider as a rental payment on your home. There's a lot of people that are more interested in social security than they are in soul security. In Colossians, the 3rd chapter and the 5th verse, Paul said, For this we know, that no whoremonger, no unclean person, no covetous man. Now this covetous man was the guy that put things before God, who is an idolater, hath any inheritance in the kingdom of Christ and of God. You do what you want to. I don't spend a lot of time preaching about giving. The reason I don't is that I think that we're mature enough, but every once in a while, because it's my responsibility as a preacher of the gospel, I have to bring the issue back up for a vote. Do we want Social Security or do we want soul security? What is the worth of the soul? Is it worth you doing without a little bit to make sure that the kingdom of heaven is garnished? Now, the Church of Christ, that is this congregation, won't be putting on bake sales, won't be having flea markets, won't be having garage sales, won't be sending letters throughout the community to beg and plead people in that community to send a little money because our little church needs some help. I know that's going on in our area, as I've been told. If the Lord is married to the church, don't you think it's the Lord's responsibility to take care of her? If she's not married to the church, then whose responsibility is it? And if she is not being taken care of, does that tell you to whom she's married? You know, there's a lot of times that I always make sure that my wife is full. Every once in a while, I'll even play a little part of feigning that I'm hungry And it's not hard for me to do that because I can be hungry at the drop of a hat. But I'm more particularly interested in making sure that she is taken care of and that she is satisfied. Sometimes, and you all know that this can be done, we see that we're not doing what God has commanded when it comes to giving. Now, the Church of Christ doesn't teach this tithing business. No, we kind of left that in the Old Testament because the commandment in the New Testament is not to tithe, it's to give. And if you don't understand it, a tithe is where you paid 10%, but giving is more than the tithe because the giving is an act of love, where the tithe was an act of penalty extricated to the Jewish people to keep up the government. And as we understand the law of God and the teachings of Christ, if the sacrifice in the New Testament is far greater than the sacrifices offered in the Old Testament, shouldn't it seem to be true that when somebody is in the New Testament church, they shouldn't expect to give the same amount as was given in the Old Testament church, where the blood of bulls and goats and the ashes of heifer couldn't take away sin? 6 to 8 brethren met in a small frame building to decide if they could afford a preacher. They hadn't had a preacher in there in a long time. And so they were trying to figure out if they could bring in a preacher every Sunday. When they got together, one of the fellows said, you know what I'll do? I'll up my giving $5 a week if you can get the other 10 to help pay the preacher. Now, that's about the price that they expected him to come for, $15 a week. One said, I can't do that because I promised my son I'd buy him a new bike. And if I do that, it's going to take me 3 or 4 weeks to get up the money. The other one said, I can't do that because I told my boy I'm going to buy him a BB gun. And another one said, well, I can't do that because I got to buy my son a new baseball mitt. He made the team in high school, you know. This guy said, my daddy only gave what he knew that the Lord had blessed him with. He stepped up and said, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll up my giving $20 a week. You know what $5 a week will buy you? Do you know what a baseball mitt will do for you when you stand at the judgment bar of death? Do you know how a BB gun will do much for you when your soul is on the line? Years went by. They did get a preacher to come. They found one that they could pay the price they wanted to pay, and he'd come. And the man that upped the giving so that the preacher could come, the gospel of Christ could be preached, had 2 sons and 2 daughters. The 2 sons were those who learned to be preachers of the gospel. The 2 daughters married preachers. And the grandchildren were faithful Christians, and everybody knew it. Not bad for $20 more a week, was it? That investment caused this person to have peace and security in his home where the rest did not. Years ago, Linda and I were sometimes running short of money. We'd actually take our money and put it on the table and count it out so we could see what we could pay and what we couldn't pay. It never came time when we figured out we couldn't pay the Lord, because we figured if we didn't pay Him, we couldn't ask Him to bless us. Because it did cost God quite a bit to send Christ to this world. And the tender words that breaks the heart of stone that'll turn the prodigal back homeward bound cannot be done so if the Father of heaven does not bless our efforts. No one has to inform his child of the Father's love, but there's a lot of us have to be reminded that the Father has asked us to express our love toward him and brethren by making sure that what we do is sufficient. Why, Lord, have you placed in these earthen vessels the treasure of heaven? The story of God's love is a love that we cannot comprehend. It's a sacrifice of a son. It's a vicarious atonement that has never, ever been appreciated. And a lot of times we don't look at it the way we should. Not bad for a $5 investment. Many times we try to feel sorry for ourselves and we can't make it, or it's not going to be enough, and it may be all true. But with your efforts and with the blessings of the Lord, what can you have? Yet about the Apostle Paul. The Apostle Paul didn't have a job. He went around at night because he didn't have clothing. He asked the brethren to make sure to tell Timothy when he came from Ephesus to bring that cloak that he left there because he was in jail. And of all the brethren that were in the Church of Christ at Rome, some of them couldn't figure out that it got cold at night. And that when it got cold at night, the Apostle Paul was sitting in there naked in that jail without clothing to wear. So he said, you tell Timothy when he comes to make sure he brings me that cloak. Did that ever bother you that the Apostle Paul would have had to have asked somebody to bring him a coat from 150 miles away when there were wealthy members of the Church of Christ 5 minutes from the jail cell? There's a lot of times that people don't understand that the God of heaven is not poor. He's not looking for relief. His church is not holding out her hand and saying, give to the poor because Christ won't take care of his bride. It's because the devil has got in the hearts of a few people, and they think, well, I'll put in my $20 a week, but how long have you been doing that? Oh, for the past 20 years. You mean to tell me in 20 years you're not making more money than you did then? Well, I don't have to put my money in. Well, I think that's where you're wrong. I think if you got anything out of what I've preached tonight, you can't afford not to. The high cost of not giving is what you can't afford. Because if God doesn't bless your efforts, if God is not working with you, it's no wonder you're having trouble meeting your bills. It's no wonder that you're having trouble making everything work out. But God said, if I'm for you, who can be against you? Now, the other thing that you have to remind yourself of, if God's against you, it doesn't matter who's for you. So, to hold on to that dollar bill and squeeze that nickel until the buffalo, if they still have buffalo nickels, if they squeeze that nickel till the buffalo balls, or to make sure that we've got enough money that we don't have to worry about it, so we're going to cheat on the Lord, or just ignore the fact that he's there. And then when you lay down to sleep at night, say, Father, give us this day our daily bread. You're praying the prayer of a hypocrite. You're asking him to give you. And he has told you, okay, fine, make a deal with you. In the Old Testament covenant, he said, if you'll do what you're supposed to in the tithe, I'll open the doors of heaven and pour you out a blessing so great you can't receive it. They didn't believe that, so they began to try it. And as the means of God's blessings was bestowed upon them, they forgot that God was blessing them, and the first place they short-circuited their expression of love was in the treasury. I only ask a question. Is it so that you cannot understand that the high cost of not giving is too high a cost? Oh no, we're not in any dire straits in this congregation, thank God. We don't have to worry about a lot of things that a lot of people do. The Lord has shined His blessings on us in so many ways that it's inconceivable. We can even afford to air condition the place. What a blessing that is in disguise. But is it because we are so good with a dollar bill and some other brethren aren't, and therefore they don't meet on Sunday nights? Or is it they're not meeting on Sunday nights because there's no dollar bill involved? It's just because they don't have enough faith in God to be there. You know, it's just the high cost of not giving. There's sometimes say, well, you know, we came to the men's meeting the other night and the question that came up was how much we're going to pay the preacher. Somebody said, well, if we're going to keep paying the preacher what we pay him, we've got to figure out some way to cut down on the building payment. Well, sometimes you can pay too much for the preacher, and he's not preaching the gospel, or they wouldn't have to worry about paying him that much. And there's sometimes, it can go the other way. You don't ever worry about paying the preacher because you just take it as the fact that he's going to preach free, and we're going to put up with him so he can just continue to preach. But see, your problem and my problem is, what does God think? And what has He commanded? And what expression of love does He see when the offering plate goes by week after week and there is nothing that you show in the gratitude of love? If you're here and need to respond to the invitation of the gospel, Jesus commands, he that believeth and is baptized shall be saved. He that believeth not will be damned. If you need to come, well, we come as we stand and sing.